they are popping up all over the country. I expect to see more here in DC, where I live, as well as, Los Angeles is going to continue to be berated with these protests. I think all major cities are continuing to plan these protests.
The overnight curfew in Los Angeles, enforced by police to try to prevent looting, has now expired. There have been days of violence in the city centre as people protest against immigration raids. And demonstrations are also popping up in other major US cities, including New York, Chicago, Austin and Washington, D.C. Let's talk now to Caitlin Doornbos, who covers national security at the New York Post. A very good afternoon from us in London. What demonstrations are expected today? And where are they?
Yeah, they are popping up all over the country. I expect to see more here in DC, where I live, as well as, Los Angeles is going to continue to be berated with these protests. I think all major cities are continuing to plan these protests.
Is the National Guard likely to be sent to each and every one of them?
I think what you saw in Los Angeles was something different than just protest. In Los Angeles, it was cars being lit on fire and businesses being looted and really extreme acts of quote unquote protest, which really align more with riots or insurrection, as has been put by our president. So I think if Chicago and DC and New York and those protests can remain calm and lawful, you won't see National Guard being deployed. And right now, I'm not hearing of any plans to deploy the National Guard or the Marine Corps to other cities. It's not to quell protests, because those are protected under the Constitution. However, it is to quell these riots that are dangerous and burning the city down.
Are many of the protests that are planned in other cities specifically because the National Guard was sent in by the president to Los Angeles?
It is probably a stirring factor that came with it, but I think we would have seen the spread of these riots or protests, really, regardless of whether or not the president had sent in the National Guard and the Marine Corps, because that's kind of what happens with protests in America and in a lot of countries. You look back to the George Floyd riots of 2020. Those began in the north of the country and then spread throughout the country. And we saw riots from LA to New York with those as well. And the National Guard was not involved in quelling that protest.
What do you make of Donald Trump's claims that Los Angeles would be burning if he hadn't sent in the troops? What's your sense of the reaction to that comment in Washington, D.C. across the board?
I think you have to look at it in specifics as where the burning is happening, because I've spoken to a lot of people in Los Angeles who say that they're continuing about their day-to-day, continuing their lives, and that the protests and riots are really limited to certain neighborhoods and shopping districts. Now, that doesn't make them any less dangerous, but it does put some caution and pushback towards the president's words that the whole city would be burning. I do believe that the neighborhoods where the riots were happening would continue to be burning if the National Guard and Marine Corps hadn't been put in. It was important for the president to show the law enforcement that are handling this situation that the U.S. government has their back, not just ICE, but across the spectrum of the administration. However, it's being received both positively and negatively in DC's factors, depending on what side of the aisle you fall on. Obviously, Republicans are very firm, and they've seen immigration as a real problem, illegal immigration as a real problem. It was a number one topic that people voted for in the November election. And the Democrats are worried about the human rights concerns of uprooting families and non-criminal illegal aliens and exporting them back.
But Caitlin, across the top of that, is there any sense within the Republican Party that actually the response of the president to these protests was just too politicising of a National Guard?
I've seen some commentators that are within the national security realm that do criticize it and say that this has been a politicization of the armed forces, which is a big no-no, really, in America. Um, but largely, as with many issues, the Republican Party falls in line with the president. He's the leader of the party now, and everyone kind of definitely supports what he's doing, especially when it comes to illegal immigration and cracking down on that.
Yeah, but do they? I mean, is there not a contingent in the Republican Party that thinks, gosh, we have found ourselves on the back foot of so many extraordinary things since the arrival of President Donald Trump's second term in office? I mean, not least the very unseemly spat between Elon Musk. And then along comes a protest which our opponents can say was handled by the National Guard because Donald Trump wanted to distract attention from what is going on Capitol Hill. And that's not a good look. Isn't that something that must be said by some people within the Republican movement?
No, I'm sorry. It is such a definitively behind Donald Trump, and this issue is specifically so strong. There are, I'm sure, behind closed doors, there are some conversations, but you just don't see people in the Republican Party pushing back against the president, at least on this specific issue. I will say that there is a
But
good
there have
contingent
been, but
of
there have been
Republicans that
tempers have flown and harsh words have been said in meetings, particularly about Elon Musk. I mean, that's just a fact, Caitlin, isn't it?
well, I think Elon Musk is an entirely different issue than the illegal immigration
Oh
thing.
no, for sure.
There
But I'm
are
just
also
trying to.
Republicans that push
Sure.
back against against the president's take on Ukraine and limiting aid to Ukraine. I mean, that's a big issue that Lindsey Graham and others in Congress have continued to push back against the president on. So I guess what my comments earlier about Republicans always falling in line with President Trump, that's not always the case. But I haven't personally heard any questioning of whether or not we should send the National Guard in from Republicans. I've seen a lot of criticism from the left, which, is valid, but I'm just not seeing it within the Republican Party at this time.
Thank you for talking to us this afternoon. Caitlin Doornbos covers national security at the New York Post.